Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin by welcoming members and officers and those members of the public watching via YouTube. Could I extend a special welcome to Councillor Nick Gay, who's attending his first meeting of the committee. County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place? There's no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting. We'll all make our way downstairs via the nearest available exit, which is through the middle doors on my left. Muster point is in the car park to the rear of the building. Okay, item 1, apologies and declarations of interest. Dawn, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Liz Brennan, Matthew Pink, Howard Nelson and Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? I see nothing in the room, so thank you. Move on to item 2, which is the public minutes of the Pension Fund Committee meeting on the 20th of December 2023, which we're being asked to approve as an accurate record. Can I ask if any member who does not agree with this proposal to raise a hand now? See nothing in the room, so we will take that as approved unanimously. Thank you. Item 3, we have no petitions or public questions today. So we'll move to item 4, which is Administration Performance Report. Can I ask Michelle Oakenson, Governance Regulation Manager, to present this report?
Thank you. So just to pull the key details out of the report, as you'll remember back in December, we asked if we could increase the target from 5 working days to 10 working days for the retirement benefits from active employment. And this was based on previous analysis that we'd undertaken. So as you can see in the appendix, appendix 1, for that particular KPI that has turned to green for this period. What it probably would be worth noting that we obviously still have a bit of an issue with the estimate retirements. And these are effectively due to the fact that we've obviously prioritised payment of benefits to ensure that our members are receiving income firstly. So the sickness that has been reported in quoted in the report obviously was excessively high for that particular period, which has also impacted the KPIs. Obviously we're monitoring that. Some of that sickness is now naturally resolved, but some of that sickness is actually being monitored through the performance monitoring and sickness management system. So obviously as that improves, we expect the KPIs out that are red for this particular time in amber to improve also. There were also 2 vacant positions within the operations team at that point in time. And as we've spoke about previously, the team generally is fairly inexperienced, so there is still a lot of building up of experience within that team also. So we will obviously at the next meeting provide you with an update of how the sickness and the training and the upskilling and everything has impacted the KPIs. So moving on to the customer journey KPIs. Obviously throughout the year we've been bringing the developments of those to you. And Appendix 2 brings the most up-to-date position. It's probably worth noting that, as we've said previously, we believe one of the first funds to be able to or to be looking at delivering this level of reporting. So when we are looking at the customer journey reporting, we are talking about every single point of contact within those KPIs to meet those statutory performance indicators. We will, for the next version, be looking to refine the wording slightly around the comments, but effectively where we're talking about new joiners, for example, where we have automated processes in place, we have an element of that process that we can confirm that 100% when it comes in, we have a process in place that the next week they will be processed. But obviously, the less control around that is what's being provided by the employers. And then also there's obviously the member elements of those as well. So as we go through, we'll obviously keep refining the KPIs and the wording to get that to absolutely up to scratch to where we want it to. And obviously just to highlight in there, the dependent KPI is currently in progress, and this is because a new process is due to be able to actually capture that information. That is currently underway. And there is a delay on the pension sharing order one due to delay of GAD guidance on that one as well. Just wanted to mention, so although Appendix 4 is confidential without naming the employer, just wanted to mention that the payment has now been received, so it is no longer outstanding. However, there was an issue for the January payment as well. Both of those have come in, but they have both been late. So just really for the reassurance that we'll be keeping an eye on that particular employer. And obviously, if there's any more breaches in line with the policy, we'll update you of that. And just the final thing I just wanted to mention really as a comment on this report under the non-material breaches. Conscious for quite a while now, we've been coming to you and saying about the refund of contribution payments and the 5-year limit that we have to period that we have to pay those. We've obviously been waiting for legislation to be amended to remove that requirement. We did get an update from DLUC quite recently to say that it is not on their work plan for this year, so not in 2024. However, will pick it up again in 2025 due to more pressing issues. So that statement, unfortunately, will be on there for a while to come. But I think they're the key details from the report, but happy to take any questions.
Members, do you have any questions or comments? Obviously, bear in mind that Appendix 4 is confidential. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I do not want any names of employers to be given in this. I'm not asking for that. But it strikes me that a significant proportion of our failure to achieve KPIs is down to employers' failure to provide us with information on time or at all. Additionally, I note the schedule showing that in most months, there are some employers who either fail to pay us on time or fail to notify us of the schedule on time, or both. Are there any employers, and again, I do not want any names given of any scheme employers here, but are there any employers who are particularly recalcitrant here, given the size of their particular the number of people they've got in their pension fund, and are there consequences for the failure of employers to do what's required for the pension fund?
Yeah, so in terms of contributions, we've actually been on quite a journey to get actually most employers to pay their contributions on time, and our funding team are very on the ball and have processes in place to be in contact at the earliest opportunity and to try and resolve contribution issues. We do have a late payment of contribution policy in place, which does effectively outline at what point we will start considering reporting to the pension regulator. So effectively 3 consecutive months, or within a 6-month period, 3 months within that also would trigger at least a discussion at committee about whether we were going to report. We have reported employers in the past to the pension regulator. It does get to the point where we've exhausted all avenues. We obviously prefer to resolve before that point. And actually the pension regulator, the first thing they will always say to us if we've got any issue with payment is, what have you done to help resolve this? As in, have you offered the correct support and that type of thing? So we do have robust processes in place. In terms of other employer information, part of this KPI supplementary reporting is to identify any systemic issues that we do see with employers. So the next stage of that would be when we get the reporting where we can start to see patterns. We will then deliver extra support to that employer and training to ensure that they know what the requirements are. And supported by that, we have the administration strategy as well that's currently under review that I believe is being brought to this committee later in the year as well. So we do have several approaches with employers that we can use to make sure that they are submitting information when they should be.
Yeah, if I could just add a point to that. We are launching that new admin strategy, and part of that will be the emphasis with some data on how late some of the information is coming through compared to how quickly we want it to come through. So we will obviously, with the employer forums this year, which Corey will lead on, we'll go through that, and they will obviously be backed up with communications as well. We're trying to identify the employers where there are systematic issues with the timeliness of information. Broadly, the ones we're most concerned around are clearly around people retiring or wanting to take immediate benefits, where ideally we would get the information 10 working days before they leave. That's incredibly difficult because sometimes they need to know what the pay is before they tell us. And I think when they tend to be more delayed than they should be is when the employer particularly doesn't realise the person wants to take immediate benefits, and it therefore comes through on the normal end of month. Sorry, the month after they've left on the monthly reporting, and that's what creates the problems. But we're going through that, and just to reassure you, Corey's team have fined employers for the non-provision of information on time, particularly around year-end processes. So our admin strategy already has teeth, but we're making it, improving it so it should enable us to get the information in a more timely way as well.
Just following up on that one, could I ask, is there a sort of situation whereby these employers are perhaps not as aware of their duties as they should be, and they aren't aware of the kind of questions that they should be asking their employees when they have that termination discussion with them, in whatever way it may be? So that they're not actually providing you with the information because they don't realize they have to provide that information. They aren't asking the question to the employee when the employee resigns or whatever to actually understand, the information that you need to have. And is it a question that we almost need to think about? Is there a standard pack that could be given to them to say, ask these questions?
Chair, if I can just, if I come in on that part, this is one of the things that obviously I look at with employers. The particular problem is the larger organisations where there is not that one-to-one relationship between the HR department, the payroll department that sends us the information, and the staff that are leaving. So there are a myriad of factors and places where it can fall down. Particularly, does the manager know that that's what the intention is of the employee? Have they passed that intention on to HR and payroll? So there is an awareness issue there. And with the message that in 2014 that you no longer had to get your employer's permission to retire, members don't realise they need to have that conversation. So one of the things that we're doing with the website development that we're doing next year is the information pages where there are processes for both the member and the employer to get an outcome. That page will speak to both parties. So at the moment, we have an employer hub, we have a member hub, and they don't see what each other's responsibilities and duties are. So the idea on the new website is it will talk about what the activity is, the benefits of it, what the member needs to do, what the employer needs to do, and then what we will do on the back of that. So it should hopefully make that 360 awareness on the whole process, and that both parties need to be talking to each other as part of that. There are also systemic issues with some of these large payroll systems that are used, and the iConnect system, because it is an automated system and it is looking for triggers. It's about having the right triggers in the system as well. So I'm working with some of those large employers to talk through what those appropriate triggers would be, try and understand their HR and payroll systems so that we can have a proper discussion about how to make sure that information comes through to us correctly and on time.
Thank you for that. And just referring back to Chris, I think that feels a little bit like we're in control here, even if the employers still need a little bit of assistance. Members, any other questions or comments on this report? I can't see anything there. So I think we're just being asked to note the report, aren't we? Right, lost my space today. So we're happy to note that report. Thank you. Move on to item 5 then, which is the governance and compliance report. And again, over to Michelle to present this report.
Thank you. So really just wanted to pull out 3 areas where there's been some additional developments since the report was published. So the first area is on pension dashboards that we've obviously been talking about over recent months. And in actual fact, until about 3 days ago, there wasn't going to be much of an update. But on the 25th of this month, the DWP have released a ministerial statement providing an update on the publication of the connection guide, which does include this staging timeline for us to connect to the dashboard. So this statement confirms that all schemes and providers in scope are legally required to be connected to the pension dashboard ecosystem and be ready to respond to requests by the 31st of October 2026 at the latest. So where we fit into this, it's now been announced that for all public service pension schemes, the connection date is confirmed as the 31st of October 2025. So effectively there we have that year between when we need to have everything in place and ready to go and from when the dashboards goes live to the public. So within that year period, obviously, there will be a lot of testing and making sure the systems are ready and fit for purpose by the 31st of October 2026. As you'll see in the Appendix 1, we have provided a really high level pension regulator checklist just to kind of show how we've been preparing to achieve the connection to the dashboards. Obviously, now that we've got concrete dates, we have updated the project plan in line with the LGA guidance to make sure that we're obviously on top of all the key areas, 9 key areas, making sure that we've got controls in place. One of the big things with the dashboard guidance is about the record of decision making. So every decision that is made in connection with dashboards, we need to be able to be prepared to prove how those decisions were made and have a log of those. In light of dashboards, Mark will pick this up in more detail, but this has effectively transposed into 2 business plan activities to make sure that we're keeping track of this throughout the year and we're bringing regular updates to you. So there's 2 elements of that. There's the actual procurement of the ISP, to make sure we've got all the arrangements in place for that and the system in place. And then we've got the continue to prepare for the dashboards, which we've had on the business plan previously as well, just to make sure that we're obviously keeping up to date with all the system work that we need to do and making sure that our records are as up to date as possible. So that's the kind of current position on dashboards. So moving on to McCloud, just really one small update on this since the last meeting. So DLUC have started a closed consultation on the draft McCloud statutory guidance. And this consultation has been sent out to a select number of parties, and we have been asked to respond on a regional basis. The benefit of this guidance is to support administering authorities by providing a consistent approach in the first instance, but also it does contain some really technical guidance as well about how certain technical issues should be approached as well. This consultation finishes on the 12th of April. So we are currently working on a response to feed through the regional group on our initial thoughts of that guidance to provide additional clarity there as well. And then the third item, really just about the general code of practice. Obviously, that has been on the cards for quite a long time. It's been delayed several times as well. But it finally came into force yesterday after being laid in Parliament in January. It was previously going to be known as the singular code, but the actual final version is changed to the general code. Quite a lot of work in terms of just making sure that we're compliant with the new code. 5 main areas of the code, and within those areas, multiple modules. And the complexity of the code, bearing in mind it's 171 pages, quite a lot of detail in there. It does cover mandatory items as well as best practice. The previous Code 14 that we had in place was all public service. So it was maybe a little bit easier to kind of navigate, knowing that it was all relevant. This particular code, we obviously need to understand what is applicable to us as well. So effectively, our new governance advisors, Hymans, have developed a compliance tool, which has effectively broken down all those 171 pages into, firstly, relevance to us, and secondly, what we would class as mandatory, and then what we would class as best practice, but actually that we want to do. Probably one important thing to say about the new code is, because it's a consolidation of all the other codes that are already in place, we are not expecting big pockets of work that haven't been looked at previously. We're expecting maybe just an odd tweak of things that may be in the new code that weren't in the previous versions. And we've also done quite a lot of work, as you know already, on some of the key topics within the new code, such as cyber resilience and pension scams. We've already continued on quite a high path on those anyway, to make sure that we're as compliant as we can be. So obviously, once we've done that compliance piece, we aim to bring the results of that compliance to you, and a high-level action plan, hopefully in June, that we'll be able to share the results of that to you. So they're the main topics in the report. The only thing just to mention is the training. So we have obviously the ultimate 12-month deadline coming on the 20th of July, and that's for all members to have completed their mandatory online training. However, maybe slightly more pressing is if anybody hasn't done their risk monitoring training on the platform, if that could be done as a matter of urgency, that would be greatly appreciated. But apart from that, that's all, everything I just wanted to say on that report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Michelle. Just on the point of training, that is, so new members to the committee will need to do that, but they have 12 months from the date of their appointment to actually carry out that training.
Yes, thank you. Good point. Yeah, so to the new members, it is 12 months from the date of appointment for you, but for everybody else, 20th of July.
So if we can do that, that would be good. Chris.
Thank you again, Chair. As I said to you just before this meeting, one never ceases to learn on this committee. And certainly there was one item in the report which I saw, which had never, ever occurred to me before, which I found very interesting. And that was the anecdotal suggestion that there may be some members of the various pension funds of the Muslim faith who have decided to withdraw from pension schemes for religious reasons. And a very interesting report was produced by Mufti Faraz Adam of Amana Advisors, and the LGA sought counsel's advice, Lydia Seymour, who gave some fairly robust, I thought, advice, but did point out that there really isn't much evidence yet collected about the extent to which there may be a problem in terms of people of the Muslim faith withdrawing from pension schemes for religious reasons. And one of the recommendations that she made to the LGA was that data should start to be collated about that to ensure that there wasn't the potential for something to be a legal issue in terms of discrimination. Have we done any such exercise for our pension fund about any withdrawals for religious reasons, whether from people of the Muslim faith or other faiths? And if we haven't done, will we be doing so to try to assist with what the LGA is now meant to do?
Thank you. So I'd probably say we haven't up to this point done anything specifically. However, what I can say is part of the agenda, and actually one of the business plan items in the next report is actually to look at our EDI principles as a pension fund. So part of that would be looking certainly at member communications, making sure we're communicating effectively, making sure that we've got appropriate choices, which actually feeds into the AVC paper later in the report as well. But as part of that exercise, we can maybe start to think about these types of things, see if it's something that we can collect data on, should collect data on, what we can do with that data. So probably something that is on the radar to consider, but until we've got to that point where we've obviously started to look and really think about it. But we can obviously keep you updated of how those developments progress.
Interestingly, Chris, that was exactly the same point as I picked up. So, but I do think it is really important that we think about these things. And, you know, I think there is a rule in any kind of EDI, which is that the only people who actually understand the discrimination that they feel they face are those who are actually facing it. And one of the things that we need to do is, you know, we will, if we are not part of a particular group, we will not understand the discrimination that they feel. And, you know, it is about perception. Most discrimination is about perception. And I think it is quite important that we do think about this. So let's do keep it on the agenda, please. Members, any other questions on this report? No, I see nothing around the room today. So we're being asked to note the governance and compliance and report and note the immaterial amendments to be applied to policies and strategies which are set out in section 9. Are we all happy to do so? Thank you very much. In which case we will move on to item 6. It's the Employers' Admissions and Cessations Report, and over to Corrie Blow's Employer Services Manager to present this report.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is our usual standing report, just giving an update on the employers coming into and leaving the fund. As you'll see in the report, there are 6 employers that are joining the fund at the moment. All of those are contractors, so the committee does not have the discretion to refuse entry, so you're asked to note the entry of those employers, but to approve the sealing of the admission agreements. There is one full admission in that group where the risk is transferring to the contractor. The other 5 are pass-through agreements, so the risk will be staying with the scheme employer. So no change to the risk to the fund for those 5 cases. In terms of cessations, there was one pass-through cessation in this report, so there is no assessment needed for that one for the exit valuation. The liabilities and the assets are going to be held by Cambridgeshire County Council. And the report also gives an update on one previous cessation where I undertook an exit credit determination for the Compass Contract Services. Following a multifactorial decision, it was determined that there was no exit credit to pay in that particular case. I have nothing to add to the report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Members, any questions, comments on this report? Adela.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question on Appendix C with the Compass Contract Services Limited. Can't hear me. Oh, sorry. I just wondered if they put in an appeal.
No, an appeal hasn't been received yet.
And do they have a certain amount of time in order to?
They have 6 months to make the appeal. I believe we are 2 months after the decision, so they probably have 4 months left on that.
Okay, thank you.
Members, any other questions around? No. In which case, then we're being asked to note the admission of the listed bodies to the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund and approve the sealing of the admission agreements, and note the cessation of TNS Catering Limited and note the update on the previously reported cessations relating to Compass Contract Services. Are we happy to do so? Thank you. In which case we'll move on to item 7, which is the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund Business Plan and Medium Term Strategy 2024-25. Can I ask Mark Whitby, Head of Pensions, to introduce this report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is obviously looking at the year-end position from the current scheme year as well as next year. And we've also got an additional recommendation, which I'll come to in a moment, around membership of an organisation which would support some of the work we're doing. So in terms of the current year's business plan and where we are at year end, section 2.1 and appendix 1 provides a summary of the activities. There are 4 which are amber. I think 3 of them, they've been amber for at least one reporting period, and I've gone through the detail of why that is. Generally, it's the actual, we've not been able to progress because of government initiatives and things like that. The one which I do want to mention, though, is the website, which wasn't amber. It was always going to be the development finalised and launched in the 24-25 year, but we did expect to have a test website available for you to have seen by the end of this calendar year. And because the WNC digital team are using an outsourced contractor, they ran into resourcing issues at the last moment, and so it unfortunately wasn't completed. But I understand from Corey that it's almost there. But so we will be, a test website will be available shortly, and we'll complete the rollout of the new website in the 24-25 year. The GMP reconciliation is amber. I haven't put it in the 24-25 plan, but I will confirm once it's completed. We expect it to complete around the end of June. So it's just a bit of work just to finalise that activity. The year-end financials, I should say, are in the new business plan on pages 76, 77, and of course they will be, once we know the final numbers, they'll be presented with the accounts when you have sight of those. So that's the 23-24 activities. The new business plan is in the same general format as you've seen for the last version. But there are some activities I do need to bring to your attention. Michelle's mentioned a couple of those, but this is really important. The pension dashboard program, we've been doing quite a bit of work to revise our project plans following the project reset from government. I had to update them again once this new staging date was announced the other day, as Michelle mentioned. But the 2 activities, so the pages 79 and 82, the pension dashboard, the ISP procurement. So the ISP is the integrated service provider. It's effectively the link between our system or our server and our data and the dashboard ecosystem. So it's how all the information goes between the two systems. We wanted, as you're aware, from our software procurement, our new software provider, whoever that was to be our ISP, and that was part of the testing. We couldn't actually finalize and test the pricing because the reset meant there were delays within what organizations were offering. But what we, as you'll see from the ISP activity, what we're seeking to do is to do a variation to our contract to enable that to include the ISP services. I've discussed that with procurement. It's a small amount of additional money compared to the size of the software contract. So they are completely comfortable with that being a variation to the existing agreement. And so that's the proposal within the business plan. So hope you will be agreeable to that. The other obviously activity around dashboards is the preparation. So that will be a quite a significant project. You'll get discrete reports on that going forward as to how we progress through that. In terms of other things I just want to bring to your attention, there's just 2 more. Note that there is a decision whether to extend we'll do a full extension or any extension to the Mercer contract following the IC objectives review. That's what we said we would do in the current business plan. So that's transferred over to the new business plan. I want you to be comfortable with the timing of that. And then finally, the other activity I do want to just bring to your attention is that we're looking to revisit multiple investment strategies. When we did it the first time round, it was a no for then, but we did say we would need to probably revisit it if the environment changed. So there's a two-stage approach here. One, to double check that the environment has changed such in terms of our funding and asset growth that it's worth looking at again. And if so, we will then let you know what that would cost and what it would entail to go through that reassessment. So I did just want to flag that. Resourcing, there's a proposal on section 3.4 of the paper for it equates to 2 to 3 junior posts for the fund. The majority of the additional cost, I should say, on staffing is not that additional resource. It's the uplift in terms of salary growth and increments on the existing staff base. That additional resource, obviously, we when we share our papers, obviously it goes through the approval process with Michael's either Michael or who he delegates to approve these papers in any particular period. It also has the approval of a Section 154 officer in Northamptonshire, but I do believe those are needed in order to deliver this business plan. The budget does, in terms of the staff cost, does include a vacancy factor of 4.5% of total staff costs, which is now aligned completely with what the council uses, WNC Council, for their vacancy factor. So my establishment is greater than that amount, and that's pretty much standard practice. And the final thing you'll be pleased to know I want to mention is the additional recommendation, which is around us seeking agreement to sign up to Pensions for Purpose. It's primarily a support community providing advice, including technical advice around sustainable investment, which we are often undertaking a lot of, and also exploration of impact investing. There's no cost, but the reason I'm bringing it to you is because there is a member directory, and if you were to agree to Cambridgeshire signing up, the fund's name would be added to that directory. That's my final comment on the document. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Chris.
Thank you very much. I've been searching through all the appendices to find this information, so thank you very much indeed for pointing out it was in the main report on 3.4. When I read this, I saw that effectively, given the CPF activity, we are talking about an increase in full-time employees on CPF of 2 and a bit. I have no base figure to use on that. So what is the current FTE figure for the CPF, please?
Okay, so the total service is just over 90 if we were to include these additional posts. So it would be I think it's 91, 92. The number of individuals is higher than that because we have part-time staff. The amount I attribute to CPF, it's roughly half that. I mean, CPF is a bigger scheme than Northamptonshire. So there are some areas where it's almost a 55-45 split. Other areas are straight 50-50. So it tends to be anything which is scheme member led tends to be balanced more towards CPF because you've got more members. Anything which is sort of governance related, that sort of thing, management, it's a straight 50-50. So roughly about 45 to 50.
That's really helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
So ignoring the staff vacancy factor, which is an accounting matter, as far as the basic complement is concerned, we're talking about an increase of 5% approximately. To what extent has there been any overview of that?
Sorry, when you say overview, how do you mean, sorry?
Maybe by the chair of the committee or by any councillors, or is that not the sort of thing which comes before us for consideration?
I mean, in terms of so this is the body which decides whether the resources of that are attributed to the pension scheme. In terms of oversight, as I say, the papers go through scrutiny with statutory officers. There's pre-meet discussions that we have a pre-meet with the chair. So before every meeting, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the chair and the vice chair are invited to a meeting, and we discuss the full paper pack, which has already been drafted. Prior to that, it goes through statutory officer approval. So that's if you like, the oversight of all the papers, and the business plan would be no different. But it is delegated to this committee to decide the required activities for the year, and I'm obviously stating what the resources required to deliver those activities are.
In terms of what you're actually saying is, yes, I was aware of it. I was aware that this was one of the decisions we need to make here, is whether to approve these activities. And this is where we should be making that decision. One of the things that strikes me is looking at an awful lot of the things that are going on. I'm actually concerned about the ability to meet a number of these statutory things that are actually happening, and that does bother me, and it does feel like there is additional work being placed on officers on an almost continuous basis. But you're quite right, we need to be absolutely clear that there is a good reason for having these additional people on board. You know, so I don't think there's been any objection to this change from any of the other consultees on this. So it is really down to this committee to decide whether they're happy or not. Chris?
We have to make decisions based on the information available to us. When again, a recommendation is made to us, I think we have no choice but to agree to it. I just am not comfortable with the process we've got to here, and it being looked at in more detail, even if it's only by the chair and vice chair. And I just wonder in future if there could be slightly more robust examination of the case beforehand, but particularly looking at how well or how heavily we are resourced compared with other similar pension schemes. I've absolutely no idea. I'm not trying to suggest that we're bad or good. I just don't have that data, and it's the lack of data which just concerns me slightly. And I don't need to have the data, but I feel that you and the vice chair possibly should have more access to comparative information to ensure that we are getting we're administering this in a cost-effective way.
Hand over to Mike.
Chair, thank you. Through you. I think Councillor Bowden raises a good point in terms of the comparators. I'll look to Ben and Mark in terms of the SIP for stats and when that was last bought here to draw out that. The posts were discussed with us within finance. I think in terms of the scale of growth, both in terms of the complexities is set out in there, the training need, we recognise that I think this is a requirement for the fund that we were willing to accept and agree. I think hopefully we would then see an improvement in performance, but I would take the points made that I think learning in terms of the greater clarity of need and maybe including what has previously been reported around SIP for benchmarking in this would have been helpful. But that is something we can refer back to, and maybe the chaps can remind me of when we last brought that, but it has been through this committee before.
Yes, I mean, I think the SIP for benchmarking we used to bring religiously, but I think it was the former committee said they didn't want to see it anymore. But of course that we can bring whatever you want. So we receive SIP for benchmarking every year. We participate in that. It's a decrease in, as I think Michael will know, it's a decrease in number of funds that were participating, although there was an uptick, I think, in the last year. But we've been pretty much middle of the pack in terms of that. But we can obviously share that going forward.
Yeah, please, can we share that information? And I think, we've looked at it, certainly from my perspective, I looked at it from the point of view of the changes as Michael has actually outlined there. There's a requirement to do something because things were there. and I had actually asked previously this question about whether we have the right resource to actually facilitate all of these changes. And sometimes that is not about the actual numbers of heads, but whether those heads actually have all of the right skills that we need to achieve what we need to achieve. So hopefully some of the benchmarking will help us with that. Chris, over to you again.
On a separate issue, if I may, Chair, and going back to our last discussion, I've flicked through again the business plan, and I can't see anything under which we could include the conversation we had a half an hour ago about looking at the possibility of any discrimination there may be, or individuals who are leaving the fund or not joining the fund for religious reasons. Would it be appropriate for us to ask for that to be included within the business plan as something which needs to be considered, data needs to be collected, and a report needs to be produced?
Looking on page 82, the very last item on page 82 of the pack refers to the EDI review that there will actually be. And while it doesn't talk about religious aspects, I don't think it talks solely about equality, diversity, and inclusion. I think that there needs to be something, we do need to look more at that. And I think we also need to start focusing on the fact that we should not be talking about equality, diversity and inclusion, but actually equality, diversity, inclusion and equity, which is the modern way of actually looking at it. So ensuring all people have the same opportunity, or the opportunity to achieve the same outcome, rather than just giving everyone the same things. But it's there, and I would have thought that it's going to be covered under that part, but officers may care to comment on that.
Yes, so obviously by having that as a business plan activity ensures that we will be bringing regular updates on where we are with that particular activity. It'll probably start quite broad in terms of an action plan of what we think we can do and where we should be heading in terms of EDI and just general consensus. The actual first thing that we've identified is probably training on EDI itself. So we will be bringing that to you hopefully in June for you to have a look at that action plan. And of course, at that point, if there's any kind of wider scope of that action plan that we think that we want to, go into more detail or add more actions to it, as we can obviously have those discussions and make sure we're all comfortable with the direction going forward. Probably also just key to say that obviously we need to make sure that we're feeding into Cambridgeshire County Council's EDI policies as well, and obviously aligned with that as well. So we'll consider that at the same time.
Yes, sorry, if I may, Chair. We're actually taking a paper to the next local pension board on it. So we've actually got quite a detailed plan. So it's worth saying it goes beyond what the TPR is discussing into other areas and looking at it more holistically. We'll reflect on the comments. So my only thing is, I think obviously there are responsibilities of employers and responsibilities of the fund, and some of that information that was referred to in terms of did people not join, and would the fund know about those individuals, is what I think is what the point of trying to make. So some of this is maybe employer information, and when if we're going out across a large group of employers, then probably want to be very careful about how we do that. But I completely understand what the point was that was raised, and we'll find a way of incorporating it into that activity.
Yeah, I think we need to do so. I think that the point I was also making earlier is that there are a number of things, and there are some one or two groups with protected characteristics where they have traditionally had issues with continuity of pensions, and perhaps it's something we can pick up outside, but I've spent an awful lot of time looking at EDI policies, and I am acutely aware of some of the discriminations that are faced by particular groups that actually is directly linked to LGBS funds. Okay, members. Any other, Adela?
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a question about undecided leaver records. Bit confused about it. It's on page 84. So we've got a backlog of 7,000 cases of these records. And it says here that as at the 31st of January 2023, 1,400 cases had been reduced to give us a 7,000. And then it goes on to show how you intend to reduce 6,000 further cases over the next 3 years, starting from April 2024. So what happened between the 31st of January 2023 until now, really, because you're not preparing to do anything about the backlog until April of this year. And also what concerns me is it says here that after 6 months, the case goes into backlog, which, you know, means that a lot of these people aren't going to get their cases resolved for goodness knows how long.
No, okay, so we treat a case which is aged effectively if it's 6 months old. So if it hasn't been processed within 6 months of leaving. So we obviously have a business as usual team that is constantly processing cases. That's a team where I want to put a bit more in to make sure it can process those cases. If it becomes aged, it's not just left and put into a backlog. It's actually still processed by that business as usual team, but it's just for the purpose of reporting to committee, it's become an aged case. So it's added to the number. Now, the issue with the backlog has been that I've had obviously people within the projects team processing these cases, but more cases have become aged. So the total number hasn't gone down as quickly as I wanted it to. So that's kind of the dynamics of the service. We are clearly processing cases with multiple priorities. So we look at how old the individual is and when they're going to retire. We look at how old the case is, how long it's been around, and it's principal drivers of trying to get them done. So we haven't got cases which have been, a whole group of cases which have just been left there forever, whereas we're dealing with other ones. We are actually prioritising those at that end as well. But the complete picture, when you aggregate everything together, is that the number of aged cases hasn't gone down as quickly. And I think we've got a real pressure this coming year, in particular with the dashboard programme and with McLeod, that no matter what, it would be really hard to throw enough people at it to get it down really, really quickly. The people just don't exist in the industry. It's not easy to outsource because they have the same pressures to recruit experienced people as we do. And so what I've done is I've given what I think is a realistic timetable. What I'm doing is making sure that all points in time I can have an X number of people processing backlog cases. So the project team has been resourced to a size so it can achieve that, so it can achieve progress alongside making sure BAU is working, and that should mean the number should definitely come down. Yeah, it's a complicated picture because of the way we define an aged case. But simply, it's over 6 months, but that means it can be in various places in the office. Does that help? Yeah.
Very good at this. And will it, so this is the sort of present backlog that you know about, but is that going to be added to? Obviously, if a case sits there for 6 months, it then gets added. So realistically, you might be trying to reduce it by 6,000 over the next years, but are there going to be more as well? So
No. The amount we report to you is not a ring fence backlog. It's the looking at our complete systems. It's the total number. So it's analysing every single case on our system to go, these are the number of unprocessed leavers that are aged, And it might have come in 6 months and 1 day ago, or it might be obviously older than that if it's one that's been hanging around for longer. So so in terms of we're not going to suddenly go, we've got another 5,000 cases because we didn't report them. Every single case is reported through the reporting mechanism.
Members, any other questions, comments? Okay, so we're being asked to note the status of the 23-24 business plan, activities and current financial position in section 2. Approve the contents of the business plan and medium-term strategy for 24-25 in section 3. And agree for a membership application to be submitted to the Pensions for Purpose on behalf of Cambridgeshire Pension Fund, section 4. Are we happy to do so? Yep, I see no reason, so we take that as unanimous. Thank you. Right, next item is communications plan, and over to Corey to present this report. Thank you.
Thank you again, Chair. Yes, this paper is presenting our draft communications plan for the following year. I won't add much to the paper, but I will summarise what we're looking at in each quarter of the year. So as you can see from the report, the first quarter will very much be focused on the website development and getting that completed. Involved in that is a lot of user testing with members, employers and officers internally as well. So that will take us up until July, which is when we're looking to launch the website at the start of quarter 2. Part of the reason for that timing is in the middle of July, we'll be in the middle of our annual benefit statement process for deferred members, and the active members will be getting their annual benefit statements in August. So it feels like the ideal time to launch the new website when there's going to be a lot of interest from members in going to the website to find the information about their benefits. In quarter 3, we're going to be focusing on embedding our brand guidelines across the service to make sure there is a consistency in the language and style that we're using with our communications. That's something that's already been agreed by the Pension Fund Committee, but we're going to be looking to just embed that within the teams more closely. You can also see that we are looking to capitalise on a number of national campaigns to help promote the scheme as well throughout the year. Things like the pension awareness campaign in September, anti-fraud messages and things like that. So we will be looking to leverage those throughout the year. One of the other things that you'll see in the plan itself that I'd like to draw your attention to is a monthly member survey. What that actually is just a very, very short survey with 2 questions in it. It's the kind of thing that you would get from your bank when you've had a transaction with them, just asking if you're satisfied with that transaction. So it's not anything overly burdensome, but it just helps us to collect regular satisfaction from the members. I don't have anything else to add to the report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Members, questions on the report? Adela?
Yeah, I just wondered, what are you going to do with the information that you get from the member satisfaction survey?
So the results of that are shared with myself, Mark, and the operations manager on a monthly basis. We can analyse what the current feedback levels are on that. If there's any particular themes that are coming from that and any patterns, then we look to introduce training if that's needed with the team or address any other systemic issues that we might discover through that. Mark, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add.
Yeah, only that the Cambridgeshire LPB asked a question, it's over a year ago actually. Okay, you report the KPIs, how do we know about the satisfaction levels more generally than that? And so we have actually been reporting that to the LPB for over a year, effectively that score. What we do with it actually is we analyze. I mean, we don't get huge numbers of returns across the 2 funds we administer. But we analyse each one where the score is what's gone wrong. Well, is obviously really great, but what's not gone as well, and we actually we may tweak processes to deal with that. I'd say that generally I think we're averaging currently. I think it was just over 4 out of 5 for the feedback we got across the 2 funds combined. Generally, if we've not done things right, it tends to be the communication around the progress of cases. But we've been using that for a long time now.
Okay, members, no other questions? Okay, in which case we're being asked to approve the communications plan. Are we happy to do so? Thank you. Right, next item is the UK Stewardship Code 2020 submission. Can I ask Ben Barlow, Investment and Fund Accounting Manager, to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, it's a big document starting on page 103 of the pack, so you'll be pleased to hear that I'm not planning a page turner. The plan is to submit this to the FRC, the Financial Reporting Council, at the end of May, which is the next opening for submissions. Since the version that you've got here, we have had comments back from our investment consultant, Mercer, but there's nothing really material to update in there. So what you're seeing is very much quite close to a final submission. I think we agree that it would be a significant coup if it was successful to be part of the Stewardship Code, and just sort of draw out that it will sort of this report encompasses everything we do to be responsible investors and stewards of the fund with our investments. A third of applicants are actually unsuccessful on their first submission, including a number of sort of major investors, but I can't name those because we're in public at the moment. And we've also heard from other pension funds that it's very much a sort of back and forth process. With our first submission, they might come back to us and tell us what else we need to add in. But to sum it up, really, it's something that really would be a bit of a coup for us if we can have a successful submission and be included on the submission code. So with that, I'll just open up to questions.
Members, questions on the Stewardship Code submission? No? Okay. In which case we're being asked to approve the draft stewardship report, which is Appendix A, approve the submission of a stewardship report to the Financial Reporting Council by the 31st of May 2024 deadline, and request the Head of Pensions to finalise the stewardship report in advance of the deadline in consultation with the chair of the committee. Are we happy to do so? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, well, the next item is cash flow projections reports. Can I ask Corey to introduce this, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll give a short introduction and then I'll hand over to Stephen here from Hymans Robertson, who will talk you through the report. The only thing I really wanted to say before handing over to Stephen was highlighting the importance of why we're looking at the cash flow monitoring, and also allaying any fears around the point of going into cash flow negativity. Going into cash flow negativity is not a problem in itself. Actually, it's an expected natural progression of a pension fund to become cash flow negative over time as we get more pensioners and less active members in the scheme over that cycle. Why it's important is actually to monitor that and take the appropriate action to start drawing down from the assets that we've been building up for this very reason, and to be able to do so in an orderly manner. So being aware of when we might be going cash flow negative allows you to make those decisions when reviewing the investment strategy. And already this has been built into the current investment strategy as well, in terms of liquidating assets and creating a more of a cash flow back into the fund from those assets. I just wanted to highlight that point. I'll hand over to Stephen now to talk you through the report itself.
Thank you, Corey, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here at your meeting today. And before I get started on the presentation today, I just want to say how delighted we are at Hymans Robertson to have been reappointed as your actuarial advisor, and also on the benefits and consultancy side, where we've been appointed from the 1st of April. So thank you for that. Now, today we're going to talk about the projected cash flow position for the pension fund, where we're looking at the income received by the fund, that's the contributions paid by employers and also investment income, and comparing that against the benefits that we expect to be paid out. And we're projecting that over a period of 20 years. As Corey mentioned, it's really important that all pension schemes monitor this on a regular basis, but where we see a change in the emerging cash flow position, that's not necessarily a problem, okay? It's just a natural evolution of the pension fund as it matures over time. And just to give an example, if you consider a brand new pension scheme where there are active members, then clearly that scheme will only be receiving contributions from members. It won't at that time be paying out any pension benefits. Contributions would be greater than benefits, and so therefore we would say that that pension scheme is cash flow positive. At the other end of the scale, if you've got a closed pension scheme where there are no longer any contributions being paid, only benefits being paid out, then again, clearly the benefits would be, there would be a negative cash flow position. That fund would be, yeah, negative cash flow. Now, the point here is that the LGPS is somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. We're at the position where in this fund, are approaching that point where the cash flow negative position may arise. It's not a problem, but it's really important that the fund understands when that's going to happen so it can plan accordingly. Now, in terms of the pack, I've included our full advice on this in the meeting packs, and I'll refer to the page numbers in the pack. So if we look at page 163, first of all, we can just see the results of the analysis that we carried out. Now, I'm not looking to build suspense here. This isn't a Jeffrey Archer novel, so just going straight to the outcome. Based on the projections we've carried out, we expect the pension fund to be cash flow negative round about 2030, okay? So there's still a considerable period during which we expect the fund to receive higher level of contributions than the benefits that it pays out. Now, the key thing here is that there's a very small margin over that period, okay? So if there are any unexpected changes in either the benefits paid out, for example, due to inflation, and we'll go through some of the inflation scenarios, or changes in the income due to contribution levels, then that could tip the balance and it could lead to a change in that emerging cash flow position. It's one of the reasons why it's really important that we continue to monitor this and report to you on an annual basis. If we look at page 5, page 165 of the packs, what we're doing here is setting out the importance of monitoring the cash flow position. Now, very, very high level, the point of a pension scheme is to...
Sorry to interrupt. I think that, just out of confusion, I think that you're looking in your pack, and the executive summary is actually on 169 of our...
I see.
Confidential pack.
Apologies. What I'll do then, just to avoid any
which
confusion,
is page 3 of your pack,
refer
I
to
think,
the
and then
page numbers on my...
I think you've moved on to page 5 of
page
your
5
pack,
now.
which is 171
Thanks, Chair.
in the overall pack.
So yeah, so page 5 of my advice, highlighting some of the reasons why it's important to monitor the cash flow position. So very high level, the point of a pension scheme is to pay out pension benefits to members. You need cash to do that. So clearly it's important to understand if you're not going to receive that cash from contribution income, you may need to receive that from your assets. So generate income from your assets. So that's a key thing, understanding if you do need to generate income from assets, how much income do you need and when do you need that to be paid in order to pay out pension benefits. It's also really important that the fund doesn't reach a position where it's really got no cash to pay pension benefits, and that happens by surprise. Because if that happens, then you may have to sell assets at inopportune times and therefore not get full value for them. So that's one of the key things. We're really trying to avoid that by monitoring the cash flow position over time. And everything that we do here in monitoring this position feeds in to considerations made on the investment strategy review. Now, if we look at page 6, what we're showing here is the emerging cash flow position over the last 4 years. We can see the bars at the top that is the income coming through contributions and also from transfers in. And at the bottom, we're seeing the benefits paid out and transfers that have been paid out of the scheme. The key thing here is to note that the cash flow position has been positive over the last 4 years, so more contributions than benefits paid, and that excess cash has then been invested in assets to generate a return. So the position has been positive in recent years. And the question may be, well, why are we now coming along with this analysis and explaining the emerging position to you? And really it's because of the big change in the level of benefits paid out of the scheme over the last couple of years. So in 2023, there was a pension increase order of 10.1%. So all pensions were increased at 10.1%. And next month, pensions will be increased at the rate of 6.7%. So the 2024 pension increase order is 6.7%. And that reflects the high levels of inflation that we've seen over the last couple of years. So that really shifts the dial in terms of the pensions that this pension scheme and all LGPS funds will be paying out. And so it's really important that we remeasure the position now and explain that to you so you can see the effect of that going forward. If we turn now to, so page 7 has got some information just on the different cash flows of the fund. And just to reiterate, when we're looking at sources of income, in the charts that I'm showing the level of contributions that we're expecting to be paid over the next 20 years, split between employer and employee contributions. So we're not allowing for investment income in those contribution projections, but we then do some analysis to look at the investment income that's required should there be a shortfall. I'll explain all when we get to the results. On the outflows, so what we are doing is we're taking the results of the 2022 valuation based on the assumptions underlying that valuation and projecting forward an expectation of all benefit payments expected over the next 20 years. So we're allowing for all pensions, retirement lump sums, and death and service benefits, for example. On page 8, there's a little bit more information on the methodology. Just one thing to highlight from this here. Within the contribution projections, we're aware that in 2023 and 2024, there have been sort of agreement over the level of pay increases to reflect that the high level of inflation we've seen over that period, and we've allowed for that in our analysis. So when we are projecting forward contribution levels, we've allowed for the pay agreements reached in 2023 and 2024. If we move on to page 9, what we're doing here is explaining the different scenarios that we've modelled as part of this analysis. So the baseline scenario, and that's the centre line on the chart, is really based on the market's consensus for future inflation, okay? So it's looking at a long-term CPI of slightly over 2%. Remember, the Bank of England target is 2% CPI. So that's the sort of slightly above 2PI is the current market consensus for long-term inflation, CPI. We've modelled 2 other scenarios. These are designed to be a little bit more extreme. So first of all, we have what we are calling the recession scenario. The name's not important. What is important is that this is a low inflation scenario. So you can see that the recession scenario, it's a yellow line if you've got a coloured pack, it's the bottom line. So a long-term inflation of just over 0%, between 0 and 1% into the long term. So far lower level of inflation than what we've seen in previous years. And the high inflation scenario is the top line, the green line, where we're expecting, we're projecting a future CPI of 4% long term over that projection period. Now, in practice, inflation is going to be far more volatile than the straight lines that we've drawn on this chart. But I think it's important that, we're not too onerous in designing these inflation scenarios, that they represent extreme cases or sort of the bounds of where we expect inflation to be over that 20-year periods on average each year, and are there to give you an understanding of how the cash flow position could be different under those different types of inflationary scenarios. So that's the background and the scenarios. I'm now going to move on, and please ask questions if you've got any as we go through. On page 11, we are showing a projection of the benefit payments for the fund over the next 20 years. We can see at the moment on the left-hand side, total benefits is just under about £150 million, so about 140, £150 million. And you can see how we expect that to grow over the next 20 years, such that based on the baseline assumptions, we would expect benefit outgo to be about 280 million pounds in 20 years' time. Those benefits are growing due to inflation, but also due to members' benefits coming into payments. Well, the actives and deferreds today, their benefits will come into payment over that 20-year period. What's important is that we're expecting benefit outgo to double over the next 20 years. So just under 150 million today, that will be close to 300 million in 20 years' time. So clearly the cash requirement over that period will increase. If we then look at page 12, we can see the projection of benefits on the alternative inflationary scenarios. Now, we've used the same scale, so these charts are comparable. And also the dotted line shows the position of the baseline inflationary projection. So first of all, on the left-hand side, under the low inflation scenario, which we've called recession, you can see that pension benefits aren't growing as quickly as they are under the baseline scenario. So At the end of that 20-year period, we would expect benefits to be slightly over £200 million per annum. So still higher than the level paid today, but clearly not as great as the baseline projection. And on the right-hand side, under that high inflationary scenario, we would see benefits exceed £350 million per annum at the end of that 20-year period. And what this does is really highlight the the significance of inflation when projecting forward benefit payments. There's a difference of about 160 million between these two scenarios at the end of that 20-year period. So inflation is really important. The high inflation we've seen over the last 2 years has led to an increase in benefit payments. So it's obviously really important we continue to monitor this going forward. On the next page, page 13, we can see a projection of contributions. So employer contributions in the darker colour, member contributions in the lighter colour. At the moment, contributions are slightly higher than benefit payments, and we can see contributions continuing to grow in the future. Now, here we're assuming that the size of the active membership of the scheme remains constant going forward, okay? So we're not allowing for or assuming any reduction or increase in the size of the scheme in terms of the active membership. Clearly, if there was to be a cut in the in local government, then that could lead to a reduction in contributions going forward. But we've not modelled any of those scenarios, and we're happy to do so again if we had to. So this is simply based on the active members, the same size of active members, but allowing for payroll increasing at 3.2% into the future. So we can see contributions grow over that period. On the next page, page 14, we've then compared benefit outgo with the contribution income. On the left-hand chart, contributions are on the top, benefits are on the bottom, and where benefits are greater than contributions, that centre line will be negative, okay? So what we can see that over the period until 2030, benefits are projected to be slightly lower than contributions paid over that period. So that dark line is slightly above the centre line. And then after 2030, we see that benefits are then projected to be slightly higher than contributions. So a net negative cash flow position emerging after that date. On the right-hand side chart, we can see the income required in order to meet that shortfall, okay? So where benefits are greater than contributions, income is then required from assets in order to pay benefits to members. And over that projection period, income of no more than 0.4% of the assets is required in any year in order to meet benefits. At the moment, the fund is currently yielding a slightly higher level of income from the assets. So if that was to continue, that would be sufficient to make sure the fund was able to pay pension benefits over the 20 years.
Chris, I think you had a question.
Yes, I was waiting for this graph to come up before asking my question, because it exemplifies really what I'm not 100% sure about. I understand why we should not be panicking about having net negative cash flow, that it is a feature of a more mature pension fund, and it should be able to be funded out of the monies which the fund has got. So I understand we don't need to be panicking about that, although we may need to make decisions about that. Am I right, though, in thinking that the information that we have in front of us, and for that matter, the cash flow, isn't really directly related to to whether the fund is fully funded or not at all? It's much more just to do with the maturity of the fund and whether the number of employees is increasing or decreasing, rather than anything to do with the funding, the satisfaction of 100% or more funding of the fund.
Yeah, thank you for your question. You're exactly right. So this is completely separate to the funding position of the pension fund, that comparison of the assets to the value of the liabilities. This is solely looking at the emerging cash flow position. And it's strange because we're in a position where the fund is moving into a position of negative cash flows, but actually when we look at the funding position, it's currently very strong, right? So the value of the assets are higher than the value of the liabilities, but that's quite separate to what we're looking at here with cash flows. Now, when it will become relevant is when we are setting contribution rates at the 2025 valuation. So if we're making changes to rates next year, and if rates go up or down for the employers, that's clearly going to have an impact on the cash flow position. So when we're doing that, we've completed our analysis and coming back to this committee, we'll make sure you see what that means in terms of the cash flow position. And whilst what we're seeing on cash flows won't directly influence the decisions made about contribution rates for employers, it's clearly relevant to understand that when we do measure the funding position, when we do set rates, we understand what that means from a cash flow perspective. Okay. On page 15, then, the next page, we're showing the results of that analysis on the low inflation or the recession scenario. And over the whole period of this projection, bearing in mind this is where we're seeing lower levels of inflation, so lower increases in benefits going forward, we're expecting the fund to remain cash flow positive over that period. Under that scenario, and on the right-hand side, no income required from assets. On page 16, we can see the results under the high inflationary scenario. This is where benefits are projected to be much higher than the baseline projection. And clearly under this scenario, we would expect that cash flow negative position to happen earlier and then to be more pronounced over the 20-year projection period. So what we can see on the right-hand side is then what that means in terms of income required. So under this high inflationary scenario, we would expect the income required from the assets to be greater than the current level of income yield being generated by the fund. Again, it's not a problem, but it's important to recognise that if this scenario does happen, then there'll be a need for the fund to carefully consider how to generate that income from the assets in order to make sure pensions are paid. I'm going to finish up very shortly. There's another slide on page 18 just showing the sensitivity to income yield. So clearly all this is really showing is that the higher the level of income yield that you generate from your assets, then the more cash you've got in order to meet any shortfall. My final thoughts, and just on page 20 in terms of next steps, really important to continue monitoring this on an annual basis. And as I mentioned in response to the question, doing this at alongside the 2025 valuation when we're setting contribution rates is really, really important. Also, understanding what's happening with emerging inflation. So just to comment on that, over the last 2 years, we've seen really high inflation. If I look at CPI from September last year to now, then I think it's safe to say that we're not expecting another large pension increase in 2025. And in fact, we could see relatively low, perhaps close to zero inflation when we get to September this year. Not a prediction, just based on what we're seeing at the moment. So we can reflect that in future analysis. I know that the analysis we carry out is fed into the investment strategy, and that's really important and feeds into all the cash flow management considerations that the officers make. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
Michael.
Thanks, Chair. I would just make the point that local government funding and schools is not looking stable as we go forward. So I think it is worthwhile modelling now and keeping under check the membership, because I think whilst we were discussing before, Mark and I, that we possibly thought this back in 2010 and 2015, and we've seen numbers fairly stable. I think with a number of developments, we will probably see membership fall significantly over the next 6 to 7 years. And then I would just reiterate to members that one of the factors under our control when we're considering this is the risk appetite around investment, because obviously that's what then drives that bridge. Other than that, it's employers' contribution, and we all know that we want to avoid that position. So it's a really helpful position to have this in terms of that analysis, but in terms of the thinking, that's where we should be looking at as the purpose of this paper.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for making that comment. It's really, really important. So just for the committee's benefit, if there were to be a significant reduction in the membership, then that wouldn't have any impact on the benefit outgo over the short period of time. In fact, it could increase the benefit outgo if those members decide to retire early. But what it will do is reduce the contribution income. So if there was such a shift, then that could accelerate the period over which the fund would become cash flow negative. If that happened really quickly within 1 year, then you could have quite a significant step change in the cash flow position. And then the fund would have to really quickly think about how to generate the income from assets in order to pay pension benefits. So having an understanding of what's likely to happen there is really important for the committee to have.
Thank you. Before reading this paper, I hadn't appreciated the effect that inflation would have on the cash flow of a pension fund. So thank you very much indeed for informing me about that. I looked at the assumptions which were made, the high, medium and low, I won't call it recession, but the high, medium and low assumptions. And I fully appreciate that inflation will never be a straight line like that, and you're just doing this for indicative purposes. Absolutely fine. I'm just a little bit concerned, and I think it's something we've got to be very aware of, that even at that high figure of 4%, we were talking about going into negative cash flow in only a couple of years. And the reason I'm a little bit concerned about that is that we know that we're on very much a downward trajectory in CPI and RPI at the moment. But the one thing which is certain is that things will be uncertain in the future. And there are various things which can happen. We've seen what happens when we have a worldwide pandemic. We can have problems with resources, and there can be problems with international relations and with war and with, for that matter, the exchange rate and government policy. And when we look back, we see that there have been significant periods when there has been really quite high inflation. During the First World War, the Bank of England, say, was running at 15%. During the Second World War, it was more like 5%. In the 70s, in the whole of the 70s, the average inflation rate was 12.5%. And we know that was largely caused by oil in the Middle East and everything else that was going on at that time. And of course, in the last year and a half, 2 years, we've also seen very high inflation, primarily as a result of pumping so much money into the economy as a result of trying to keep us afloat whilst we had the virus affecting us. Now, many of these things can be seen in advance, or you can see well before the inflation hits you that it is going to happen. And you very often get 6 months, 12 months, even 18 months warning that inflation is going to increase. But it does seem to me that we've got to be particularly alert about potential actions which may increase inflation because of the effect it will have on our cash flow. And the earlier we are cognizant of the fact that there may be an inflation issue, the earlier we can take the necessary action to ensure that the pension fund is protected as much as possible by the policies that we have and by the decisions we make about purchasing and disposing of assets. But the idea that 4% is an upper figure, of course, it's merely indicative purposes. And as we've seen in the last 2 years, and as we saw in the 70s, in the 40s, and in the period of the First World War, the actual figure can be significantly higher than that over quite a period of time. So I've learned from this that we have a real vulnerability here, and we've got to really watch out for those early warning signs when people are saying it looks as though inflation is going to go up. It should be a real warning to us that we've got to look at the way in which we manage our assets.
Certainly, as I looked at it, I don't disagree with anything that you're saying there. And one of the things that did occur to me is this, as a report, is very good looking at a particular point in time. The question I was going to ask is around the day-to-day use of this information so that we have exactly those early warnings, so that we are aware when it is likely that we're going to have to take a movement, perhaps in investment strategy, to ensure that we aren't caught out by that. I think, the very point is that it will benefit us to look at the risk appetite that we have to say, can we actually cover most of this through perhaps taking a little bit more risk than we currently are? We can afford to have things at the current time that are more illiquid, but actually there will come a point where we need to make sure that we have adequate resource, perhaps in those lower risk, more liquid resources. So it does suggest that we need to be on top of this on more than just an annual basis, I think is the point. It needs to be an ongoing practical use of the information which has been presented here.
Exactly that, Chair. And the primary purpose of this is to let you better understand how the position could change in the future and looking long term, thinking about the inflation scenarios. But you're absolutely right. A focus on this is required in the short term. And I believe that already happens in the pension fund, a very, very keen focus on the emerging cash flow position. And actually, when you look at that closer, there's other factors as well. So things like management expenses, things like transfers in and out of the fund, which are really difficult to predict, can sometimes change that cash flow position in a short period of time. I know the fund are all over this and they're really, on top of what's happening. So this is designed to really supplement a lot of the good work the fund are already doing.
Sorry, Ben.
Yeah, just to add some detail there and hopefully some assurance, we are looking at the bank statements on a daily basis. We upload it into a treasury system. We have estimates that we compare against actuals. We have a buffer. If we go above that buffer, the money goes into money market funds through our custodian. We keep a certain amount of money in there to make sure we can pay our pensioner payroll. So we will know to the day, or even less than that, maybe half daily. We know when we hit any triggers. And what we've been shown today is just an exaggeration of that into the future, but we are doing that daily.
It's fortunate cash flow forecast where things come in on a regular basis, such as the contributions, as long as employers pay them. I think the one ask that I actually have, I think, follows on from Michael Hudson's comments. It does occur to me that we do need to look at the sensitivity of this to changes in membership levels, because I think that is going to be a critical thing. And I wouldn't, I know Michael comes at it from a particular perspective, but we're seeing a very, very, the possibility of a changing landscape. And that may actually mean that we're looking at things in a very different way, and we don't know which way that will be. Adela.
Sort of following on from you, I just wondered, the state retirement age keeps creeping up and up, doesn't it? And a lot of people don't take early retirement. Well, they do take early retirement, but they sort of plan it in line with when they're going to actually get the state pension. So you're probably going to have members contributing. Have you sort of taken that into consideration? And also, they won't be paying out too much. Sorry.
Thank you. It's a really good question. We do allow for an expectation that active members will retire at the state pension age. So at the moment, as that's defined for each individual member, we assume they retire at that age. And if you look at on our page 11, the projection of pension benefits, we can actually see what we're expecting for the active members. So the active members are the lighter green and also the dark, really, really dark green. So you can see that at the moment, certainly over the next few years, the total benefit outgo in respect of those actives is relatively small. But clearly, as we go further out into the future, then a proportion of the total benefits paid out are more heavily weighted towards current actives. So it's really important. It is important from a benefit perspective, but you're right, it's more important from a contribution perspective. So if we see more early retirement from active members, and if those active members aren't then replaced, so similar to the question that we had from Michael, then that could lead to lower contributions going forward. So the assumption is members retire at the state pension age, but if there are any changes to that, then clearly that could also disrupt this analysis. Thank you.
Peter.
Thanks, Chair. It was just to make the point that, and I'm sure the managers are well aware, we're in an environment where youngsters who are joining any organisation maybe aren't staying for the kind of period that they would have done in the past, and that I would be interested in that kind of modelling, what it does to not just our fund but other funds in there. It's not unusual for younger members to maybe join for 4 or 5 years, not 25 years. Thanks.
It's an interesting trend that we've seen an awful lot more people in very short, or seeing careers in very short sort of time periods. Okay. Go on.
Just one small point on the comment about the reduction in membership or the movements in membership in the future. One of the things that we do as part of the valuation process is with our large council employees in particular, because they have the biggest memberships in the fund. We do usually send out a questionnaire that asks about any anticipated membership changes as a whole, so that we can track that through. Usually we're looking at something of 10% and beyond as something that we see as material. So that's the kind of questions that we'll be asking employers again at this valuation.
Thank you for that. Members, any more questions, comments, observations? Okay, we're being asked to note the contents of this report, and I trust we're happy to do so. I'd just like to say thank you, Stephen, for coming and presenting that report. And I think everyone probably gained something from there. Thank you. Right. Very nice. Right, item 11 is the committee agenda plan. Officers, do you have any comments or updates on this?
Just a comment, if I may. Obviously, the plan in the pack today is quite light touch with today's agenda items, and for June. Now that the business plan has been approved, we'll look at mapping those business plan activities across, and obviously looking at any policy and strategies that need to come back to the committee in this financial year as well. So the next version of this will contain a lot more detail.
Thank you for that. Members, any comments on this at all? In which case, we're being asked to note the committee agenda plan. I'm happy to do so. Thank you. Right, in order to discuss the following items, we need to move the meeting into private session, excluding press and public. Members, do you agree with the proposal to move into private session? So we're resolving that the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the following 3 items contain exempt information under paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed, information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. As this is the final item, public item on the agenda, I would like to express my thanks to those members of the public and press who have taken time to watch the meeting today via the council's website. The broadcast will now end, and the committee is due to meet next on the 6th of June